It is such a pleasure to have this opportunity to really learn a little bit more about the fintech ecosystem and central banking, two topics obviously of enormous interest to you and Your Excellency and the global economy. I think to sort of kick off this conversation, it's good to maybe do some table setting a bit on the place of SAMA, particularly as it relates to innovation in financial services, but also financial technology. I mean, what's your view on SAMA's particular role?
Well, first of all, Assalamu alaikum jami'an, and thank you so much, Chris. Welcome to Riyadh. I understand this is your first trip.
It is. Thank you so much.
So hope you enjoy this great event. And I'd like to thank the organizers for bringing in a wonderful crowd, great number of people that will discuss topics around fintech. I think, looking forward to engage with yourself and to meet with all of the fintechs from all over the world that will be discussing really topics around fintech. So on the topic of the role of the central bank, I think it's extremely important to keep in mind that the main priority for central banks and for the Saudi Central Bank is the monetary and financial stability. It's extremely important to keep that in mind as we look at engaging with new models, new technologies in the financial services industry, making sure that these models maintain the sustainability and the stability of the financial sector. Right? It's also important to understand the foundations that are built to support that stability, ensuring that these foundations are maintained, understanding the potential risks that new models could introduce, and making sure that there is the right mitigation for these types of risks. So that would be the core focus on ensuring this type of risk is properly maintained. Now, to provide the value for the financial services industry in general and in particular to fintechs, it's important also to keep in mind that the financial sector is a critical sector to support the overall Vision 2030 in the country. There are a lot of industries that need to be served as part of Vision 2030, tourism, hospitality, retail, but also important industries like housing. So a lot of new and innovative financial services, products, solutions, and fintechs are offering these new services and new value to these clients. So it's important that the financial sector maintains that resilience, maintains the trust in these financial services industry providers as they provide these new types of and forms of value. So what SAMA has been doing over the past period is ensuring that there is the platforms that provide the opportunity for these different fintechs to experiment with these new business models, right? So the creation of the sandbox, we just heard His Excellency, Chairman of the Capital Market Authority, talk about the sandbox in CMA. We've heard His Excellency, the Governor of the Saudi Central Bank, talk about maintaining the stability, but also welcoming new financial business models. So the sandbox is a great opportunity to have that dialogue. But it's also important to see how these new models could reflect on the regulatory framework, right? To make sure that the regulatory framework evolves into supporting these new different models. But in addition to the sandbox, the Saudi Central Bank has also created different initiatives and programs to support fintechs. So, for example, one of the programs is called Makken. It's actually an enablement program for fintechs. And the objective is to have these fintechs focus on their core business and work with other parties that can help them ensure the compliance to the requirements of the central bank. Because the requirements for things like, cybersecurity, counter fraud, AML, CFT, right, needs to be maintained. You cannot compromise on that. But you need to also think about these fintechs, smaller companies that need to comply to all these requirements. So that program is designed to help these fintechs solve these problems and focus on their core. The other idea I think that's important is looking at talent. So it's important to really work with different entities in Saudi Arabia. So one of the entities is Fintech Saudi, for example, that looks at bringing these different fintech organizations together. But then also the Financial Academy, which focuses on building talent and providing this talent to the different fintechs and allows them to focus on their core.
That is impressive. It's ambitious. It's broad. One thing that I tell my students in Washington is that central banking is both global, but it's also national. You're looking at a number of different mandates. When you think about modern central banking, there's really a desire to kind of address different kinds of objectives, some of which ostensibly have trade-offs, but you talked about trust, you talked about stability, issues I want to get into a little bit more. But when you think about central banking, usually trying to advance integrity, usually trying to advance things like stability. How do you take that trade-off, or how do you try to achieve these multiple objectives like consumer protection on the one hand, but also enabling innovation at the same time? What's your philosophy, and what's your strategy, and how can central banks achieve those two very different objectives?
I mean, we have to do it with a lot of care. I think that's really the key. Because again, as we said, stability is key. Resilience is very important. Sustainability is very important. So we need to really be careful as we introduce new models. We welcome innovation.
Yes.
We welcome new models, but we need to really make sure that all of these models go through the right scrutiny to understand the impact on stability and resilience. So, and we need to also be careful when people talk about trade-offs or balance. What happens in the back of the mind is that there is a compromise, and that's something that is also something we need to be very careful with. Stability, trust in the system, sustainability is unquestionable. Is as His Excellency the Governor always says, these are red lines. You cannot compromise on stability. You cannot compromise on trust. You cannot compromise on that sustainability of the financial sector. So, but what's important is to say, what are the risks? How do you mitigate these risks, right? There is always ways to mitigate risk, to understand the implication of introducing new models, and then working with the different innovators, entrepreneurs, to address and manage these risks. And the risks are, clear to many. Cybersecurity is extremely important for us to address, to minimize the impact of fraud, business continuity. But there are risks around data, for example, access to data, risks around the introduction of AI. I mean, there is a big drive to introduce AI into the financial services industry. And that's something that we welcome. At the same time, we need to say, what's the implication? What is the impact? And how can we make sure that there is that continuity in the trust? There's new technology that is coming, like quantum computing, for example. What is the impact of quantum computing on cybersecurity, on data privacy, on access to systems? So these are all important elements that we need to look at. And what SAMA has been doing is introducing risk-based models for supervision, right? You cannot treat everything in the same way. You need to really look at regulation and supervision from a risk perspective and focus on the right areas so that you can allow these models to be successful and to thrive. And we also work with global entities. So at the end of the day, these challenges and risks are not unique in this region. They are global. So we also seek collaboration with other central banks within the region, but also globally to say, how have we addressed these challenges? How did we introduce mitigation to some of these risks? And I think that collaboration is extremely important between central banks, but also within the fintechs. This platform today is a great opportunity for people to share these risks and understand how to mitigate them.
So I'm hearing modularity, I'm looking at or hearing nuance, research, rigor. But I also heard these terms of trust and stability. And when you think about the enablers of financial innovation, usually you think about issues like financial infrastructure. But we've talked about this before, and you also talk about stability. What is the relationship? And I think it's particularly interesting as from your perch as the Vice Governor of Supervision. What's that connection between stability and fostering innovation?
Well, first of all, stability is extremely important for the system, right? We cannot introduce new models that could create a question for stability, even for the investors and for the entrepreneurs and the fintechs. If they do not have the trust in the financial sector as a whole, how do you know that your investment is going to be healthy, to be successful, to have the opportunity to grow? So that stability is critical. And SAMA, over decades, have focused on ensuring the stability of the financial sector. That is definitely a platform that continues to be solid, needs to really be maintained, and ensures that any new models that are introduced do not touch on that stability. And so what SAMA does is performs regular stress testing to the system, understands the impact of potential scenarios. So what if these types of scenarios occur? What should really be the readiness of the different financial services providers, including the fintechs? So you need to really say, are you ready for this type of change in the system? We've seen different waves that hit the financial sector around the world, and you need to be ready.
Yes.
So that readiness is extremely important. Understanding business continuity and the impact of any change to the continuity, because at the end of the day, we need to look at the value created to the consumer. How will scenarios impact the consumer and their experience, right? You need to maintain, as you mentioned, the consumer protection and making sure that whatever financial services organizations the consumers are working with, their financials are protected, their money is protected, the services that they expect will continue to be maintained. So I think that's an extremely important point. In addition, working with global organizations. So one thing that is important to mention, the financial sector assessment program that's conducted by the IMF and the World Bank has just been concluded in Saudi Arabia recently, and the reports will be coming out. And it's a very important confirmation to the stability, to the resilience of the financial sector in Saudi Arabia. And we need to make sure that whatever new entrants, new models that come into the system, are compliant to these solid, high standards expected in the financial sector.
What I find so interesting about that answer is hearing those words of trust and stability. This idea that trust is not just a question for banks, but it's also of relevance for fintechs as well, in terms of development. I know we don't have too much more time, but when you do think about fintechs, do you have any advice, if one will, for fintechs who are looking to become financial players, both here within the kingdom or internationally, who are perhaps thinking about setting up business here, particularly in light of this conversation and in light of your role and responsibilities?
Well, it's a very important point. What type of advice should we give to different fintechs, entrepreneurs, investors? And I'm sure there will be a lot of discussion throughout the coming 3 days. And you will hear it from other speakers and in different meetings. I think the key, really, which is extremely important, is to think long-term, to think about sustainability, to think about potential value creation and what will the end consumers and users of these fintech solutions be receiving, right? On a consistent, sustainable way. I think that's an extremely important point. The second is for fintechs, for entrepreneurs, my recommendation would be close to your regulators. So we as, for example, the central bank, but also to the Capital Market Authority, the Insurance Authority, we're all keen to listen, to really create the opportunity for these fintechs to experiment and explore their business models. And as we listen and agree to the way that these fintechs would operate in a safe environment within the sandbox, that also feeds into enhancing, improving, and expanding the regulation that covers these particular business models. So I think it's important to be close. It's important to mention that, again, SAMA and all the other regulators, we are open to have these types of discussions and dialogue. We're welcoming innovation, but we need to make sure that we are clear on our expectations. So what do we expect from the different players in the market, including the fintechs? So we have very good clarity on that. We publish the regulation, we adjust and enhance the regulation based on the new models, but the expectations are clear. But it's also important that we are clear that we are firm on maintaining the stability and the trust that we mentioned. Part of the advice also is to say, be clear on the value you are creating for your customers, right? Listen to your customers, right? Understand the different models that your customers are looking for. And also utilize the platforms that exist in the country. So you mentioned FinTech Saudi is a very important platform that creates the opportunity for different fintechs to talk to each other, right? The Financial Academy we mentioned, but we also create events like this, right? That encourages fintechs to actually talk to each other and say, hey, I have this idea, maybe we can complement each other, right? Because not everybody will do everything to their clients. You will add value in one area, maybe other fintechs can add value, maybe complement that with providing better insights. So work together. I think that's a very important point that I would love to mention.
Yeah, again, what I find so interesting and powerful in those comments, and one of perhaps the word that you've repeated the most is value when it comes to fintechs, and this idea that that value comes from sustainability, it comes from a longer-term perspective, and it comes from being close to your regulator. And to have that conversation and to give those words of advice specifically to upstarts is particularly notable. Thank you, Your Excellency, for your time. This has been a really interesting conversation. As you know, I learn a lot from talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And again, thank you to all of the participants of this event. We really look forward to continue to have a dialogue and a discussion with you over the coming 3 days, and hopefully continuously as you experiment and explore your different business models. You know, Saudi Arabia is the largest economy in the region. We believe we have the foundations, we have what it takes to really be the fintech hub and the fintech destination that we aspire to be. Again, thank you so much, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you.